Something terrible happened here. This was my initial impression when exploring the eternal city of Nocron for the first time. The city is covered with stone figures, literally bursting from the imposing Gothic towers which loom above the streets below. These strange figures have inhuman proportions, greatly range in size, and are only found within the two intact eternal cities. Some cower in fear, others look up with grim expressions, but all appear to have borne witness to something truly horrifying. They remind me of the living statues of Pompeii, stone shadows of the inhabitants of a doomed city, their final moments as a great calamity fell upon them, frozen in time. I have a theory about what happened to these people, one which will dive into the many unexplored facets of the eternal cities. The giant skeletal corpses found upon great thrones within the center of each city, and the false night skies which illuminate the underground. A terrible ritual which would alter fate itself occurred here. Before we talk about these mysteries, however, we must first pick up the story where we left off last time, with the destruction of the nameless eternal city. It's important to note that the Deeproot Depths feeds into both the Ainsel to the west and the Siofra to the southeast. We reach this location by either using an enchanted coffin to travel up the Siofra River, and we can take another coffin to travel downstream to the Ainsel River basin. The Nox seem to have traveled a similar route, starting at the destroyed Eternal City, splitting into two groups, one which traveled down the Ainsel River to establish Nokstella, and the other which traveled down Siofra to establish Nocron. E.G. describes these two cities as sister cities.
I take it you've heard of the Eternal City of Nokstella? Well, it has a twin, known as Nocron, the other Eternal City.
The fact that they are considered twins leads me to believe that they were built around the same period, following the destruction of the nameless Eternal City. Estelle's location at the end of the Ainsel River supports this timeline, as if Nokstella was already established at this point, Estelle would have had to pass through it to reach his current location, destroying this city as well. This journey through the underground must have been treacherous, with the Nox refugees being picked off by the giant man-eating ants found within the underground. Their queens all drop Numen's runes, and we know that the Numen were likely a race within the Nox Empire. But they did manage to survive, and went on to build some of the most architecturally impressive structures within the lands between. The Eternal Cities are hauntingly beautiful. It is here they would remain, through the rise and fall of the Hornsent, through the establishment of the Golden Order. Their time underground seems to have physically changed them in a number of ways. Their skin has become a pale gray, and if the metal windows in Celia are any indicator, they may not be able to tolerate direct sunlight any longer. I stated in my last video that I believe the banishment of the Nox coincides with the arrival of the Estelles, and that the destruction of the nameless Eternal City, which was once above ground where the modern-day Leyndell stands today. I'll explain in depth why I believe this is the order of events, but first I'd like to address some other popular theories about the fall of the Nox. Batty theorized in his video on the Nox that this line in the Remembrance of the Natural Born once destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky, a falling star of ill omen, implies that the Nox were already banished underground by the Greater Will, and then later Estelle destroyed the nameless Eternal City, stealing its false night sky. This theory is supported by the fact that Estelle's arena does in fact contain a false night sky like those seen within the Eternal Cities. This theory is very reasonable, and I did accept it for a time. So, why do I now think otherwise? Well, there are a few reasons. Firstly, the DLC indirectly gave us more of a connection between the Greater Will and the Estelles. In Ymir's High Priest crown, which states the circular design at the top represents the Greater Will and its lightless abyss. Likewise, the Estelles are born in the lightless void far away. Additionally, Matir's microcosm, which was a direct link to the Greater Will, uses the exact same type of purple void as the Estelles do to teleport. These connections show us that there is a much stronger relation between the Greater Will and these alien creatures than we previously thought. Finally, the Nox-associated structures within Leyndell, alongside the giant chasm directly above the nameless Eternal City, which Leyndell was built around, only really makes sense if this Eternal City was above ground in the distant past. For these reasons, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Nox being banished underground by the Greater Will, and the Nox's Eternal City being destroyed by a creature closely linked to said entity, are a single event. As for the line, Estelle once destroyed an Eternal City and took away their sky, while this can be taken literally as stealing their stars, it could also imply that Estelle took away their sky by banishing them underground, severing their connection to the stars, which is how I interpret the line. One final possibility is that multiple Estelles were sent by the Greater Will, the first wave forcing the Nox underground, who then established the nameless Eternal City. But then, the main Estelle came later and destroyed this city. There are other Estelles within the underground, labeled Withered Estelles, which lack the vibrant colors of the boss versions, potentially because they failed to catch their prey. In this explanation, the Nox were continuously bombarded by these alien beings, raining down from the heavens. They fled further and further downstream, deeper into the underground. I don't personally subscribe to this theory as I feel it overly complicates things, but it could definitely be the case. Let me know which theory you think is most plausible, or if you have another explanation. There is another reason why I don't believe the nameless Eternal City ever had a false night sky, and it is because this Eternal City lacks another feature present in both Nocron and Nokstella, the stone corpses. Remember that in Elden Ring, stars are not just hot balls of gas, they are alive. When taken in this context, the idea of creating an entire night sky underground is a far more important event than most give it credit for. Stars contain vital energy, and this life force had to come from somewhere. There is another example of a false night sky other than in the Eternal Cities, that I haven't seen anyone else mention: the massive Graven School within Rhea Lucaria. An amalgamation of sorcerers fashioned together into the seeds of stars. This transformation also destroys any organic material within the sorcerers involved. All that is left is crystal and stone. You're probably seeing where I'm going with this, which leads me to my next question. Where are all the people? Sure, you have the Nox Night Maidens, monks, and swordsresses, but other than these high-ranking religious officials, the Eternal Cities are inhabited only by silver tears, artificial beings created by the Nox. So, where are all the normal citizens? While most cities in Elden Ring are in ruins, Leyndell is still inhabited by plenty of commoners, in addition to high-ranking Golden Order priests and knights. I believe that the Nox sacrificed the citizens of the Eternal Cities to create their false night skies. The Nox were astrologers after all, and those who study the cosmos have a life force similar to that found within Glintstone. I believe there was a moment at which the majority of the inhabitants of Nocron and Nokstella were, in an instant, transformed, their life force pulled from their bodies to give rise to stars. They became the seeds of stars in much the same way as the sorcerers of the Graven Schools do. This could be described as a rapture. The Nox are said to be awaiting the Age of Stars, but the horrified expressions of these figures paint a different picture. Just like the archaeologist who discovered the ruins of Pompeii, we are bearing witness to the last moments before the Eternal City's inhabitants were transformed. The emotions within these impressions are haunting. Of course, these could just be sculptures, but the idea that the Nox decorated their cities with a bunch of lifelike, spooky statues does seem a bit silly, and not really in line with the haunting atmosphere of the underground. Instead, this seems to be an evolution of an idea from Bloodborne, specifically Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village. In this location, we also see the inhabitants of the town fused into the walls in a terrible ritual to beckon the moon. the Nox's connection to the moon lends even more support to this link, a mass sacrifice to create a pathway to a higher realm. In the case of Yahar Ghul, to the nightmare of Mensis. Elden Ring is no stranger to this theme, the most obvious examples being Enir Elim and the Erd Tree, but also likely in Farum Azula, a mausoleum filled with dead beastmen and constructed using the corpses of ancient dragons, all to await the return of Placidusax's lost god. Civilizations linked to gold and the Greater Will seem to practice mass sacrifice to create bridges to higher planes. So, from this perspective, it seems clear that the Nox performed a similar ritual and that these bodies are evidence of it. An attempt to create their own Age of Stars. This is also consistent with the creation of the Silver and Mimic tiers being an attempt to create a lord. The Silver tier makes mockery of life, reborn again and again into imitation. Perhaps one day it will be reborn as a lord. More clearly, the Mimic tier Ash states that Mimic tiers are the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. The Silver tiers may actually play another important role in the Nox's plans. Have you ever wondered why there are these giant spherical tiers rolling around the cities? They're not just balls, they are intended to be moons. This is why we find them in Nokstella, which lost its moon somehow, long ago. This is pretty important because in the Age of Stars ending, I believe the Dark Moon is essentially replacing the Erd Tree as the guiding structure of this age. Instead of a world tree towering over the lands, dictating the fates of all who reside under it, the Dark Moon would be a distant presence in the night sky above, a guide instead of an order. So, if these corpses are in fact the citizens of the Eternal Cities, then who are the giant skeletal figures within Nokstella and Nocron? They only appear in Eternal City locations which contain these stone corpses, and have false night skies. They sit upon thrones, an empty version of which we find in Celia, the town of sorcery. The grace nearby reveals that these are called chair crypts. This reaffirms the idea that these beings were placed here as part of a funerary ritual. The white and yellow robes of these giants are embroidered with the same patterns as those on the Nox's attire, clearly indicating a religious role within the Nox's society. But the skeletons themselves are not only found here. They are almost identical to the giant mummified corpse within the specimen storehouse of the Shadowkeep, the only major difference being the horns. Giants being part of Nox culture would also explain why the stone corpses range in size so drastically. Instead of two distinct species, giants and humans may be more of a spectrum. User Na McGrath shared their Reddit post with me which detailed a lot of these findings, plus more, so go check that out after the video. I've linked it below. As we discussed in my last video on the Nox, there are a number of connections between Ra and this culture, leading me to believe that the Nox are descendants of Ra. The architecture of Ra is built in a way which implies both humans and giants were a part of this civilization. If the Nox are a Ra offshoot, it would make sense their culture would hold giants in a high regard. We even see a Mimic tier transform into a troll in the night's sacred ground of Nocron, just before the mummified giant. I also find it interesting that both the Tibia Mariners and the Albinaurics within the Mogwin dynasty summon giant skeletons which are comparable in size to the Nox giants. Sully the Witch has a great video comparing these models, so if you're interested, I've linked it below. As for what the role of these mummies are within the Nox's ritual, we can only speculate. My best guess, based on the fact that they sit upon chair crypts, implying whatever their purpose was, it requires them to be dead, is that they may have been intended to serve as vessels for a lord's soul, as detailed within the white birch scroll of the Hornsent. Again, I want to emphasize that we are getting into heavy speculation here, but if the Nox's ritual was to create their own Age of Stars through a mass sacrifice, and a lord is required for this age, it's possible they are using the same ritual as the Hornsent's Divine Gate, a mass sacrifice to create a pathway to a higher plane, in this case, the night sky, allowing for the creation of a god whose return would be beckoned by a lord. A lord's soul requires a vessel. There is a good chance the Hornsent learned of this ritual from studying the Ra ruins, and so the Nox, as the true descendants of Ra, would know of it as well. The fact that the mummified giants are the same as those taken from Ra by Mesmer's forces ties this all together. Additionally, the walking mausoleums are of Eternal Empire origin and are able to contain the soulless bodies of demigods, which is conceptually very similar to the Hornsense ritual, which likewise requires a soulless corpse to act as a vessel. In the DLC, Mohg's corpse was used for this purpose. It seems like all the pieces of the puzzle point towards this conclusion, but since it is based on so much guesswork, let me know what you think in the comments. One last thing I wanted to mention is this concept art, which showed appear to be roots coming out of the giants, potentially linking them to the shamans, specifically the grandmother. But because this wasn't added to the game, we can't say for certain. Another culture the Nox have an interesting but unclear connection to is the Ancient Dragons, the first civilization to hold the Elden Ring. The Nox created the Dragonkin soldiers, which are imitations of the true ancient dragons. Ice Lightning tells us the Dragonkin were born in the Eternal City, where they knew no true sky, nor true lightning. Alas, the Dragonkin soldiers never attained immortality, and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin. This implies that the purpose of these experiments was to achieve immortality, which is an attribute of the scales of ancient dragons due to their time-warping properties. This is further evidenced by the electrified silver tears within Nokstella, which rarely drop gravel stones. Compound stones found in the lands once beset by ancient dragons are said to be the scales of these very beasts. It's impossible to ascertain what the exact nature of the relationship between Farum Azula and the Nox might have been, but it certainly could have been similar to the Golden Order, separate cultures that are linked by their connections to the Greater Will, with the shadowbound beasts being given to Nox Empyreans. The Fingerslayer blade is likely the body of a god after all, and while it could be born from the corpse of an unnamed Nox goddess, it is also possible this is how Placidusax's lost god disappeared. It is likewise a mystery if and how the Fingerslayer blade was used. It could be that its creation alone was enough to anger the Greater Will, leading to the Nox's banishment. Many in the community have theorized that the Fingerslayer blade was used against Meteor, the Mother of Fingers, and this is what severed her connection to the Greater Will. Those in favor of this theory argue that she has a wound on her chest which births finger creepers, and that this wound was carved using the Fingerslayer blade. I do find this theory interesting, especially considering that I believe Manus Meteor is a cathedral of the Eternal Empire, meaning the Nox would have direct access to Meteor. The fact that she births finger creepers from this potential wound is also interesting. The two fingers could be Meteor's earliest children, and therefore possess the ability to contact the Greater Will, and communicate through a language of light. In contrast, the finger creepers are more animalistic, and could be considered deformed children, which resulted from Meteor being wounded, and having her connection to the Greater Will broken. With these theories, we do risk making the classic mistake in interpreting From Software lore, forcing what information we do have to fit into gaps in the story, when in reality these questions were never intended to have answers at all. There is enough evidence here that I thought I would mention this theory at the very least, though. The final attribute of the Eternal Cities, and the Nox themselves I would like to discuss, is stasis. The feeling that these locations are frozen in time. Just think about how difficult it is to reach the Eternal Cities. We literally need to cause a meteorite to fall upon the lands between to clear a path through kilometers of earth in order to reach Nocron, and once we enter the city, its eerie stillness permeates through the air. This is a place that is not to be disturbed. The Nox's ritual to create the stars made this entire city into a crypt, watched over by the remaining Nox clergy. It is fitting that a dead city such as this would be found underground, on the bank of a great spiritual river. They have been here for thousands of years, and can wait for thousands more, until the age of the stars is ushered in. In a way, the Nox did outlast the system they committed treason against. The Fingers are dead or dying, the Greater Will has abandoned the lands between, and the age of stars is once again within reach. I hope you've enjoyed this two-part exploration of the Nox and the Eternal Empire. They are definitely one of my favorite cultures in the Lands Between, from both a lore and design standpoint. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope to see you next time.